You know, in combat sports, sometimes it just takes one single moment to define a whole 20-year career. For one fighter, that moment was born from the street fights of Miami, forged over dozens and dozens of brutal pro fights, and it lasted all of 5 seconds. We're talking, of course, about Jorge Gamebred Masvidal.
5? Yeah, just 5. Let that number hang in the air for a second. Because in the world of the UFC, that number, well, it means everything.
That's because those 5 seconds, that's the fastest, most absolutely electrifying knockout the sport has ever laid eyes on. It was a perfectly timed flying knee, and it literally created an icon overnight. But here's the crazy part. The thing that makes this story so wild, it's who did it. This wasn't some hotshot rookie, some young phenom on the rise. No. This was a battle-worn vet. I mean, a guy with almost 50 fights who was so dangerously close to just being forgotten, just another name in the history books. So, how on earth did he get to this point? Okay, so to really get how that explosion happened, we've got to go back. We have to understand the slow burn that came before it. I'm talking about the long, grueling journey that pretty much defined the entire first chapter of his career. All right, so Masvidal's story kicks off in Miami. He was born to a Cuban father and a Peruvian mother, and his fighting style, man, it wasn't cooked up in some fancy gym. Nope, they were sharpened out in the real world, in backyard street fights. You can still find those grainy old YouTube videos, they're legendary. And look, his pro career was anything but easy. It was a slow, punishing climb. Think about this. He debuted way back in 2003. He spent an entire decade just bouncing around different promotions. Fought in Bellator, fought in Strikeforce, a true journeyman, taking any fight he could get before he finally got that call to the big show, the UFC, in 2013. So he gets to the UFC, and he's good, but not great. He'd string together some wins, then he'd lose. It was always back and forth. But you gotta look closer at how he was losing. That's the key. These weren't blowouts. The fights were always razor thin, often coming down to a split decision. It was the story of his life. He was good enough to hang with absolutely anybody, but he just kept falling, just short. So frustrating. But then, after all those years of grinding it out, something just snapped. He took a long layoff, and when he came back, well, it was a totally new Jorge Masvidal. In 2019, that became the year of his violent, unbelievable rebirth. Now, you really have to understand the context here, because it's everything. He hadn't been in the cage for 16 months. He was on a 2-fight losing streak. I mean, by all accounts, his career was basically on life support, heading downhill fast. But he came back completely different. He had this whole new persona, calling himself Street Jesus, and he was here to, as he put it, baptize his opponents. And boy did he deliver. First up, he flies into London, into enemy territory, and just brutally knocks out their hometown hero, Darren Till. And then came that moment of pure immortality. The 5-second flying knee against Ben Askren. And to top it all off, he capped off this insane year by fighting Nate Diaz at Madison Square Garden, no less, for a title that was like nothing the sport had ever seen before. See, this fight was more than just a fight. It really captured a shift in the culture of MMA. The BMF title, it wasn't some official championship belt. Nope, it was a symbolic thing made for this one night only. And it was basically the UFC admitting that Masvidal and Diaz were two of the realest, grittiest, and flat-out most popular fighters they had. People love these guys. He won. And just like that, in the span of a single year, he went from a forgotten journeyman to an absolute global superstar. And the awards that poured in, it was staggering. I mean, just look at this. It wasn't just Knockout of the Year, which, of course, he won everywhere. It was Fighter of the Year from ESPN, from Yahoo Sports, from CBS, Comeback Fighter of the Year, Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. I mean, you name it, he won it. The entire sport basically stood up and agreed 2019 belonged to one man, and that was Jorge Masvidal. So after all that, after becoming this massive star, there was really only one thing left to do, right? He had to get that official UFC gold around his waist. He was at the top of the world in terms of popularity, but that final peak, the welterweight championship, was still just out of his grasp. And look, he got his shots. He fought the champ, the incredibly dominant Kamaru Usman, not once, but twice. The first time he even took the fight on just 6 days' notice, but he lost both. And that second fight, man, it was a brutal knockout. It was actually the first time he'd ever been stopped like that in his entire UFC career. His last real crack at the top was against his ex-friend turned bitter rival, Colby Covington. In that fight, it was ugly, it was personal, and in the end, Masvidal lost a pretty clear decision. So, his final fight went down on April 8, 2023. It was against Gilbert Burns, right in his hometown of Miami. And after he lost that one, which was his fourth straight loss, that was it. Masvidal took off his gloves right there in the middle of the octagon and announced his retirement from MMA. And that's just a harsh, brutal reality of the fight game, isn't it? I mean, the record doesn't lie. Those 4 fights right after he won the BMF title, they were all losses. It's like the same exact fire that powered that incredible meteoric rise also led to a really fast fall from the top. So what happens next? What does a guy who's been a professional fighter for 20 years, with over 50 fights, do when he finally hangs up the gloves? Well, for Masvidal, retiring from MMA definitely did not mean he was done with the fight business. Not by a long shot. Yeah, he's actually moved over to professional boxing. He even set up a rematch with his old rival, Nate Diaz, but this time inside a boxing ring. It just goes to show you, after 52 MMA fights, that pull, that lure of combat, it's still there.
And he's not just fighting. He's also moved over to the other side of the cage. He's a promoter now. He started his own promotions, like Gamebred Fighting Championship, which is bare-knuckle MMA, and another one called Icon FC. He's got a Ms. Call brand. He's shown up in pro wrestling. It's pretty clear he's trying to build a Gamebred brand that's going to last way longer than his fighting career.
But look, you just can't tell the whole story of Jorge Masvidal without talking about the controversies. It's a huge part of it. That same street fighter mentality the fans absolutely loved, the thing that made him a star, well, it also got him into some really serious trouble outside of the cage.
The biggest one, the one everyone talks about, happened just a couple weeks after he lost that fight to Colby Covington. Yeah, on March 21st, 2022, Masvidal got into a physical fight with Covington outside a restaurant in Miami. It led to him getting arrested and facing some serious charges. In the end, though, in November of 2023, he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, misdemeanor battery.
So where does that leave us? It all comes down to this final question. After a 20-year, 52-fight career that took him from backyard brawling to being a journeyman, then to the biggest star in the entire sport, and then all the way back down again, what is his legacy? Is he the ultimate underdog story? Or is he maybe a cautionary tale about what happens when that street mentality hits the mainstream? Or is he just the BMF, a truly one-of-a-kind fighter who for one unbelievable year was without a doubt the baddest man on the planet?